By the time I reached the church doors, my wedding had almost nothing to do with me. That sounds dramatic. It is not. Drama is loud. What happened to me was quieter than that, more organized, more respectable, which, in my experience, is how certain families do their worst work. They do not scream. They schedule. They smile. They send polished group texts and call control, "Help!" They make 100 tiny decisions without you, and then look surprised when you object to the life they already assigned you. When the heavy wooden doors of St. Mark's opened and the organist started the prelude, every face turned toward me. The flowers were white roses and pale blush peonies. I had asked for none of those. The aisle runner was ivory satin with gold trim. I had asked for none of that either. Even the sleeves on my dress had been altered. Without my consent. Without even the courtesy of pretending to ask. And waiting for me at the altar, beneath stained glass and candlelight, was the man I had once believed I would spend the rest of my life with. Daniel Mercer. Tall, still, beautiful in the expensive, polished way men often are when their mothers have been selecting their ties since adolescence. He looked exactly like the groom from a luxury wedding brochure. Navy suit, white boutonniere, perfect posture, the kind of face that made strangers assume decency before evidence had ever been introduced. And when our eyes met across that church, I knew. He still did not understand what this day had become for me. Not fully. Not yet. That was going to change. Before I tell you what I did at the altar, like this video and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. Because some betrayals do not begin with cheating. They begin with a family teaching you that your preferences are negotiable. Your boundaries are rude. And your role is to look grateful while disappearing in public. My name is Nora Bennett. And on the day I was supposed to become a Mercer, I finally understood the difference between being welcomed into a family and being absorbed by one. It took me 14 months to learn that. It took me less than 3 minutes at the altar to make sure they never forgot it. I met Daniel at a charity gala. I almost did not attend. That detail matters because if I had gone with my first instinct that night, none of this would have happened. But women are raised to override intuition in socially elegant ways. We call it being flexible, being open, giving things a chance. Sometimes that works out beautifully. Sometimes it walks you straight into a family skilled at mistaking obedience for love. The gala was for an arts education nonprofit in Charlotte. I was 29, working as an event development manager for a regional museum alliance. Wearing a black dress I had rented, because my salary did not leave room for emergencies and formal wear in the same month. My heels hurt by 8:30. My smile hurt by 9. I was standing beside a silent auction table pretending to care about golf packages when Daniel appeared with 2 champagne flutes and asked whether I was trying to escape. It was a good line. Worse. He delivered it with the kind of dry restraint that suggested he was not trying too hard. I'm trying to survive. I said. He handed me a glass. That's more realistic. We talked for 40 minutes, near a floral arrangement large enough to fund a school district, about architecture, about old neighborhoods, about the strange theater of donor events, about how people with real money often confused price with taste. He was easy to talk to, smart without performing intelligence, funny without fishing for approval. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it to him without hesitation. That was rare for me. I had always been cautious. My parents divorced when I was 11 and managed to spend the next 10 years proving that disappointment could travel efficiently between households. My mother became a woman who apologized before making requests. My father became a man who promised phone calls he forgot to make. I learned young that affection without follow-through creates its own kind of loneliness. So by the time I was an adult, I did not fall easily. I observed. I assessed. I noticed patterns. Daniel, at first, passed every test I knew how to give. He called when he said he would. He showed up on time. He remembered details. He asked questions and waited for actual answers. He worked in commercial real estate development, which I had expected to dislike on principle. But he talked about restoring properties and mixed-use community spaces with enough thoughtfulness that even his ambition seemed humane. He opened doors without making a performance of it. He listened more than he talked. On our fourth date, when a waiter mixed up my order and I said it was fine, Daniel looked at me and said quietly, "You don't always have to earn being accommodated." It startled me. Not because it was profound, because it was observant. I fell in love gradually, and then all at once, which is the only honest way I can describe it. One day he was the man I was seeing. The next, he was the person I called when my radiator burst in January and my kitchen ceiling started dripping into a stock pot. He came over in old jeans, helped me move furniture, ordered takeout, and stayed until midnight while maintenance handled the leak. He made a miserable evening feel survivable. That kind of thing matters. Love is not built on speeches. It is built on who brings towels when the ceiling gives way. If the story ended with Daniel alone, perhaps it would have been simpler. But no one marries a person alone. Not really. You marry the ecosystem around them. The loyalty is already in place. The expectations dressed up as traditions. The unspoken contracts they do not even realize they have signed. I met Daniel's parents 3 months in. Richard and Celeste Mercer. I still remember the house. A stone colonial on a quiet tree-lined street with a circular drive, glossy black shutters, and seasonal arrangements on the porch that looked professionally rotated. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lemon oil and expensive candles. The furniture was pale and rigid. Nothing slouched. Not the sofa cushions. Not the drapes. Not the people. Celeste greeted me in a silk blouse, the color of cream, and earrings the size of confidence. She hugged me lightly, as if committing to full pressure would imply equality, and said, "Daniel told us you worked in museums. How cultured." Cultured. It was technically a compliment. It did not land like one. Richard shook my hand as though we were finalizing a discreet merger. During dinner, Celeste asked where my family was from, where I had gone to school, whether I had always preferred the arts to more stable sectors, and if event work was something one could do long-term. She asked each question with a smile so polished it nearly erased the insult. Daniel squeezed my knee once under the table, his private signal for ignore it, and because I was still early in love, I did. That was my first mistake. Not noticing the insult. I noticed it. The mistake was minimizing it to preserve the evening. Afterward, in Daniel's car, I asked if his mother always interviewed people over sea bass. He sighed the sigh of a good son with a complicated mother. "She just takes a while," he said. "She likes to feel like she understands people." No, she liked to feel like she had ranked them. But I let it go because new relationships are full of calculations like that. You tell yourself no, family is perfect. You tell yourself every mother has quirks. You tell yourself adjustment is maturity. Then a week later, Celeste mailed me a handwritten note thanking me for coming and adding, in the last line, "With your eye for aesthetics, I'm sure you understand how much details matter in a family. Even then, something in me tightened. Because the note was not about affection. It was about signaling. Family. Details. Aesthetics. Those were Celeste's sacred words. Not honesty. Not warmth. Not ease. Presentation. The first year with Daniel was, in many ways, genuinely happy. We traveled to Charleston for a long weekend and got lost among narrow streets lined with iron balconies and jasmine-scented courtyards. We cooked together in my too small apartment kitchen and argued playfully about basil quantities and whether anchovies deserved more respect. We binged old detective shows on rainy Sundays. He met my mother and was gentle with her shyness. He met my father and somehow endured 2 full hours of interrupted golf stories with saintly patience. I do not want to rewrite all of that now just because of what happened later. That is another cruelty betrayal commits. It tempts you to flatten the whole history, so you do not have to sit with complexity. But complexity is part of truth. Daniel loved me. I believe that. He just did not know how to love me against his family. And that difference ruined everything. He proposed on a cold evening in December, in front of a restored historic theater downtown that had been lit in warm gold for the holidays. There were no violinists, no photographers hiding in shrubs, no flash mob. Thank God. It was just the 2 of us after dinner, our breath visible in the air, and Daniel suddenly stopping on the sidewalk and saying, "I know every version of my life that doesn't have you in it feels smaller." That line would have been insufferable from another man. From him, in that moment, it was perfect. Gekneld. I laughed and cried at once. I said yes before he finished the question. For 48 hours. It was ours. Just ours. My ring. Our calls to friends. Takeout on the sofa. That soft, dazed happiness that makes the whole city look briefly curated in your favor. Then Celeste got involved. I should say this plainly. She did not offer help. She initiated occupation. The first sign came less than a week after the proposal, when she emailed me a spreadsheet titled Mercer Wedding Master Timeline. Note Daniel and Nora. Mercer Wedding. The tabs included venue options, floral references, church availability, catering tiers, family seating priorities, preferred photographers, and something called image alignment notes. I opened it at my desk during lunch break and actually laughed out loud because I assumed it was satire. It was not. By the time I got home, Daniel had already replied to her with comments. That mattered more than the spreadsheet itself. When I asked why, he looked mildly confused. "She's just organized," he said. I stared at him across the kitchen counter. "Daniel, your mother made a wedding file before we had even discussed what kind of wedding we want." He smiled in that patient way men do when they think they are calming you and are actually insulting your intelligence. "She's excited." Excitement is not the same thing as entitlement. That was the first sentence we ever argued over as an engaged couple. It would not be the last. I told him I wanted something small, personal, a ceremony with fewer than 80 guests. Good food, warm lighting, live strings if the budget allowed. No receiving line. No giant wedding party. No ballroom in a hotel where every bride was processed like an upscale package. He kissed my forehead and said, "Then that's what we'll do." For almost 2 weeks, I believed him. Then Celeste booked lunch. Just for us girls. It took place at a French restaurant where the napkins were thicker than my bath towels, and the servers called everyone madam with unsettling commitment. Celeste ordered champagne before I sat down. Then she spread out printed venue brochures across the table like military maps. "I've narrowed it to 3 churches," she said. I blinked. I didn't know we were choosing churches yet. "Well, of course we are. Spring dates go quickly." I had not agreed to a spring wedding. I had not even agreed to a church wedding. Daniel and I had discussed multiple options, including a historic garden venue and a museum courtyard. Celeste kept talking. St. Mark's. Naturally. Because the Mercer family had history there. A cathedral downtown, because the photos would be striking. Or their country club chapel because it made parking simple for older guests. Simple for older guests would become one of Celeste's favorite weapons. Practicality draped over control. "I'm not sure I want a church wedding," I said carefully. Celeste paused with her champagne glass halfway to her mouth. Not shocked. Just mildly disappointed that a decorative item had begun speaking. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Daniel and I haven't decided." She smiled. That smile, the one that never touched sincerity. "Darling, weddings of this scale involve families, not just feelings. Scale. Families, not just feelings." There it was again. The quiet Mercer doctrine. Anything personal could be reduced to sentimentality if it stood in the way of image. I set my menu down and said, "I'm not interested in a large wedding." Celeste's gaze sharpened. "Of course you say that now. Brides get overwhelmed by logistics. That's why support matters." Not support. Replacement. I went home from that lunch with a sourness behind my ribs. I could not quite explain without sounding petty. Which is another trap women like Celeste set beautifully. They create a dynamic so subtle that protest itself can be framed as oversensitivity. Daniel listened while I explained. Then he did what he would do. In different forms. For the next 9 months. He translated her behavior into something easier to tolerate. She means well. She's intense, but not malicious. She gets carried away. "Let me handle her." He never actually handled her. He softened her. And men who soften their mother's control often have no idea they are hardening their fiancé's loneliness. By February, the wedding had developed a momentum I did not recognize. Guest list drafts expanded without my approval. Celeste added family friends I had never met. Richard promised business associates invitations before Daniel and I finalized numbers. A wedding planner named Elise began emailing me timelines that referred to Celeste as primary family contact. I corrected that immediately. Elise apologized. Then copied Celeste on the next 6 emails anyway. My own mother, already intimidated by the Mercer orbit, started saying things like, "Maybe it's easier to let them take this part." Easier for whom? Certainly not for the bride being edited out of her own ceremony. I tried to regain control politely first. That is the phase people rarely appreciate when they judge women for finally exploding. They only remember the explosion, not the months of diplomacy that preceded it. I scheduled a dinner with Daniel and came prepared with a notebook. Not because I wanted conflict. Because clarity needs structure when love keeps blurring the edges. I wrote out what mattered to me. The venue. The guest count. The music. The ceremony wording. The dress. The reception tone. My father walking me down the aisle. A friend from college officiating if we chose a non-church setting. Daniel looked at the notebook and smiled fondly, which at that point was not the reaction I wanted. I love that you made bullet points. I made bullet points because I'm disappearing from my own wedding, I said. That got his attention. Good. I told him exactly what had happened with Elise. The guest list. The church assumptions. The way his mother spoke about the event, as if I were a temporary casting choice in a Mercer production. He listened. He even looked troubled. Then he said, "Okay, we'll reset." That word gave me hope. Reset. We agreed on boundaries. No decisions without both of us. No payments or deposits by parents unless requested. Elise reports to us. Not clearest. Guest list capped at 90. No church, until we both agree. I felt lighter after that dinner than I had in weeks. For 6 days. On the 7th, Elise emailed congratulations on St. Mark's confirming our ceremony date. I just stared at the screen. St. Mark's. Confirmed. I had not agreed. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the 3rd ring. Cheerful. Distracted. Inakar. Hey! I was just about to call you. Did your mother book St. Mark's? Silence. Then, it was just a hold. Elise says confirmed. Another silence. This one longer. Okay, he said finally. Mom may have put down the deposit to secure the date. May have. When were you planning to tell me? I was going to explain tonight. Explain. Such a useful verb for men who decide first and invite women into the aftermath. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Daniel, we agreed no decisions without both of us. I know. So why does your mother have my wedding date? Our wedding date. No. I said, very quietly. Not if I didn't choose it. That was the first time I heard him get irritated with me instead of the situation. Nora, can we not turn every gesture from my family into a threat? Yes, sure. Deposit. Church. Date. A full architectural takeover of the event reduced to a gesture so that my resistance could be recast as instability. I remember sitting at the edge of my sofa after that call. Phone still in my hand. Feeling something internal begin to shift. Not break yet. Shift. Like a beam taking weight it was never meant to hold. That night, Daniel came over with Thai food and apologies. He admitted Celeste had pressured him. She said church calendars filled fast. She said it was easier to secure the date now and revisit details later. She said I would come around once I saw the sanctuary dressed properly. Dressed properly. Even in apology. He repeated her language. I asked him if he understood why that terrified me. He frowned. Terrified? Yes. I said, because every time your mother oversteps, you call it logistics. Every time I object, I become emotional. And somehow I'm the one expected to adjust. He sat very still. Then he reached for my hand. I love you. That was true. And irrelevant to the actual problem, I pulled my hand back. I need you to choose whether we are building a marriage or hosting your mother's event. He looked wounded. Which, again, is often what happens when women name the thing men have been benefiting from not naming. For a little while after that, he improved. He really did. He told Celeste to slow down. He reassured me on calls. He included me on vendor meetings. We switched the florist after I hated her first proposal. We trimmed the guest list by 12. He even agreed to write our own vows, which mattered to me because spontaneous sincerity still felt like a way back to ourselves. Then came the dress. I had found one I loved in a small boutique outside Asheville during a weekend trip with my friend Simone. It was understated and elegant. Soft silk. Square neckline. Narrow waist. No beading. No aggressive train. Timeless. Not theatrical. When I put it on, I did not feel like a bride in a catalog. I felt like myself. Clarified. I ordered it without consulting Celeste. That, apparently, was my second offense. She asked to see photos. I sent one. She called within minutes. "Oh," she said. Just that. "Oh, there are women who can fit 7 layers of disapproval into one syllable." "It's simple," she continued. "Beautiful fabric, but very simple." I wanted simple. Of course, you have that modern museum taste. Museum taste. Not a compliment. She offered, very generously, to have her seamstress elevate it. I said no. Twice. 3 weeks later, during my final fitting, the boutique manager approached me, looking apologetic and confused. "Your future mother-in-law stopped by yesterday," she said. "She said she'd discussed sleeve options with you." I went cold. "What sleeve options?" The manager hesitated. "She authorized detachable lace sleeves and a higher back panel. She said you'd changed your mind about wanting more formality for the church." For 1 second, the room sounded far away. I looked at my dress. My dress. And there they were. Delicate illusion lace sleeves pinned in place, with hand-finished buttons down the wrist and a raised back line that altered the whole silhouette. Beautiful. Objectively. For someone else. Not for me. I did not cry. That is the thing people misunderstand about me. They expect visible collapse when the injury is feminine enough. But humiliation, for me, has always arrived as focus. I asked the manager who approved the changes. She admitted the boutique had assumed family authorization because the account notes listed Celeste as partial payment contact after Daniel's mother had offered to cover some finishing details. Partial payment contact. Another little surrender I had not known about. I had the alterations reversed. It cost extra. I paid it myself. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot with both hands gripping the wheel and understood, at last, the true shape of the problem. It was not only Celeste. It was the structure around her, the way money created access, the way Daniel's discomfort with confrontation became permission, the way every institution involved assumed the Louder family had more rights than the bride, the way I kept having to spend energy proving my own authorship over my own life. That night I did not call Daniel. I made a list. Every decision made without me. Every vendor copied through Celeste. Every guest added. Every pressure point. Every time Daniel translated control into care. There were 31 items before midnight. I know because I counted them twice. The next morning, I sent Daniel one text. "We need to talk tonight. No deflection. No calming language. No, she means well. Just truth." He replied, "Okay." We met at his townhouse after work. I brought the list. He read it in silence from top to bottom, then turned the page over as if there might be another version underneath with kinder implications. There are some things here I didn't know about, he said. Yes. And some things I did know about. Yes. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't realize it felt this bad for you. That sentence told me almost everything. Not because he was cruel, because he had been able not to know. That is a privilege. Love cannot survive for long. I asked him, as plainly as I could, if your mother makes one more major decision without me, will you stop it publicly and permanently? He looked away. Not long. Just long enough. That was my answer. Still, I gave him one last chance. Because endings worthy of grief usually involve one final opportunity you know may fail. But offer anyway, so you can live with yourself afterward. He promised he would talk to them. He promised he would fix it. He promised the wedding would reflect us. Promises are easy when men imagine time will solve the courage they keep postponing. By the week of the wedding, the event had grown into something elegant, expensive, and profoundly unfamiliar. St. Mark's was confirmed. The guest list had crept back over 100. Richard had arranged a private bourbon tasting for the groomsmen at the club the night before. Celeste had selected imported table linens to elevate the reception. The ceremony program listed full Mercer family honors and memorial mentions, but the reading my mother had chosen was cut for time. Cut for time. I stood in the planner's office 3 days before the wedding, looking at the final program draft, while Elise explained adjustments in that falsely soothing tone vendors use when they sense a bride is one breath away from detonating. Celeste felt the service needed a more traditional flow. I looked up. Celeste is not getting married. Elisa blinked. No one had said it that directly to her before. Of course, she said quickly. I only meant... I know what you meant. She fiddled with the papers. And suddenly, unexpectedly, I felt calm. Not because things were fine, because they were finished. There is a point in certain betrayals where pain gives way to clarity, so clean it almost feels like relief. I asked for the final seating chart, the ceremony order, the music list, the vendor arrival timeline, copies of all contracts and change logs. Elise hesitated, then handed them over. Good. I smiled, thanked her, and walked out with an entire wedding and a white binder tucked under my arm like evidence. That night I sat alone in my apartment. Shoes off, hair still pinned from a trial appointment, and read every page, line by line. Music selections I had not approved. A prayer included at Celeste's request. A second photographer for Mercer family portraits. Reserved front pew placements that pushed my mother's sister and cousins farther back. Even the officiant notes had been modified to emphasize family legacy and the joining of households with shared values. Shared values. I laughed out loud at that one. Because by then I knew exactly what values had shaped the event. Control. Presentation. Inheritance of influence. Female silence dressed in formal wear. At 11:23 that night, Simone called. She had been my closest friend since college, and the only person in the whole process who never told me to breathe before, telling me to think. Some friends soothe. Simone sharpened. You sound weird, she said the second I picked up. I think I know what I'm going to do. Pause. Then, carefully. Should I be excited or scared? Yes. She exhaled. Tell me. So I did. There was silence when I finished. Then a low whistle. Nora. I know. Are you sure? I looked around my apartment. At the half-packed overnight bag. At the neatly boxed wedding shoes. At the binder on the table. At my own reflection in the dark window. And for the first time in months, I heard my own answer without competing voices around it. Yes. I said. Simone was quiet for another second. Then she said, Okay, then I'm in. The rehearsal the next afternoon was the final confirmation I needed. St. Mark's smelled like incense, old wood, and polished brass. Late sunlight poured through the stained glass and scattered color across the stone floor. Celeste moved through the sanctuary as if she had personally commissioned the architecture. Richard spoke with the sexton in a tone that suggested long donations and minor authority. Daniel, in shirt sleeves, looked tense, but still committed to making everything feel manageable rather than truthful. That was always his instinct. Management over confrontation. Soothing over boundary. Image over rupture. And sometimes, in families like his, those are the exact traits that make disaster inevitable. We practice the processional, the vows, the rings, the kneeling sequence. Yes, kneeling sequence. A detail added at Celeste's request because it made the ceremony feel sacred. I had never agreed to that either. When Father Brennan reviewed the order of service, I raised my hand like an exhausted student and asked why there was an added family blessing before the vows. Celeste answered before he could. It will be lovely. I looked at Daniel. He did not correct her. He just gave me that helpless little look I had come to hate. The one that said, Can you not make this harder right now? And right there, under colored church light, with everyone rustling papers and speaking softly, as if refinement itself were proof of goodness, I felt the last piece settle into place. They had mistaken my patience for surrender. Daniel most of all. Because if a man sees you absorb disrespect long enough, he eventually starts calling it your temperament. The rehearsal ended with champagne in the parish hall. I did not drink any. Celeste kissed my cheek and said, Tomorrow will be beautiful. I smiled at her. It was the easiest smile I had given all season. Yes, I said, it will. The morning of the wedding began at 6:30 with hairspray, steam, and a feeling in my chest that was no longer nerves. It was certainty. Not joy. Not panic. Certainty. My bridal suite at the hotel overlooked the church square. And from the window, I could see staff unloading floral crates and rental equipment with the solemn efficiency of people building an event they would never have to emotionally survive. The room smelled like coffee, curling irons, peonies, and expensive makeup. My dress hung from the wardrobe door in its garment bag, like a version of me everyone expected to step into on command. Simone arrived first, carrying iced coffee, a soda bay, and the kind of expression that said she had mentally packed for either a wedding or an extraction. You slept? She asked. Enough. Liar. Yes. She handed me coffee anyway. That is what real friends do. They do not require your emotional performance before they support your decision. They just bring caffeine and stand where you tell them. 2 bridesmaids came next. Then my mother. Already teary in a pale blue dress she had chosen with so much anxiety that watching her wear it made me both tender and furious. Tender because she wanted the day to go well for me. Furious because women like her spend whole lives trying not to cause trouble and end up raising daughters who have to decide whether to inherit that instinct or break it. She hugged me and said, "You look beautiful." I held her a little longer than usual. "Mom," I said quietly, "today, no matter what happens, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." She pulled back just enough to look at me properly. Fear moved across her face first. Then confusion. Then the old reflex to say, "What do you mean?" But something in my expression must have stopped her, because instead she only nodded. "All right," she whispered. That nod mattered more than she knew. Hair took an hour and 20 minutes. Makeup another 45. Celeste's chosen makeup artist, naturally, had pushed for timeless bridal sophistication, by which she meant contour strong enough to survive photography, and a lip color called Rose Heirloom that made me look like someone's well-preserved granddaughter. I asked for softer eyes and less foundation. She obliged. Though with the quiet disappointment of an artist watching a client reject the version she thought would play best in pictures. Pictures. Everyone had spent months optimizing pictures. Not marriage. Not trust. Not consent. Pictures. At 9 to 10 there was a knock. Celeste entered without waiting for permission. Of course she did. She was wearing dove gray silk and diamonds subtle only by Mercer standards. Her hair was shellacked into elegant certainty. She looked radiant in the way some women do when an event has become a monument to their own influence. For a moment, she stood in the center of the room taking everything in. The dress, the flowers, the bridesmaids, me. And then she smiled. "My goodness," she said. "It's all finally come together." All finally come together. As if she had built it. As if I were the last decorative element to be installed. She kissed the air near my cheek and adjusted one of my bouquet ribbons without asking. Then she turned to the room and started giving instructions about timing. Photography order. And how the church coordinator preferred immediate family to gather in the side chapel 10 minutes before the processional. No one stopped her. That is one of the reasons controlling people thrive in formal spaces. They speak with enough authority that everyone assumes someone else approved it. She left after 5 minutes. Simone looked at the closed door and muttered, "I would pay cash to lock that woman in a linen closet." I laughed despite myself. Humor does not erase rage. It just makes it breathable. By 10:30 I was in the dress. My dress. The one I had fought to restore after Celeste's seamstress stunt. Clean lines. Square neckline. No lace sleeves. No performative modesty grafted onto my body for church optics. The silk skimmed exactly where it should. I looked in the mirror and saw myself again. Not the version they had been trying to costume. For one dangerous second, I almost wavered. That is the cruelest thing about weddings. The beauty can seduce you into ignoring the structure beneath it. Soft fabric, flowers, music, family dressed well enough to resemble dignity. All of it conspires to make truth feel disruptive. Even when truth is the only honest act left. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Can't wait to see you. Today starts our life." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "It does." That was not a lie. At 11:15, Father Brennan came to check on me. He was a kind man in his 60s, with tired eyes and the careful manner of clergy who have learned that families bring as much politics to sacraments as they do to corporations. He asked if I felt ready, asked if I needed quiet, asked whether I wanted a moment alone in prayer before the procession. I thanked him and said yes to the quiet. After he left, I asked everyone else to give me 5 minutes too. Just 5. Even Simone. When the room finally emptied, the silence felt like air after a long fever. I sat by the window in full bridal silk with my bouquet in my lap and looked down at the church square. Guests were arriving. Hats, dark suits, pastel dresses, polished shoes, cars pulling up, doors opening, smiles arranged, the whole machine in motion. I thought about the first spreadsheet, the church deposit, the altered dress, the seating chart, the reading cut from the program, the kneeling sequence, the family blessing, the months of being told not to overreact to decisions made over my head. And then I thought about marriage. Not weddings. Marriage. A life where every holiday, every future child, every home purchase, every difficult decision would be negotiated through the same structure if I said yes at that altar. A life where Celeste would keep stepping forward and Daniel would keep translating her overreach into solvable discomfort rather than fundamental disrespect. A life where my boundaries would always arrive second, after his mother's feelings, where I would have to justify my own authorship over and over until exhaustion made compliance look like peace. I knew then with complete calm that if I walked to that altar and said the expected words, I would spend the next decade trying to recover the voice I had the chance to use that day. And I was done waiting to recover later what I already possessed now. At 11:38, the coordinator knocked. 5 minutes, she said. I stood, adjusted the bouquet, looked at myself one last time. Then I opened the white binder I had brought with me in a garment tote, took out the folded pages I had prepared the night before, and slipped them beneath the ribbon wrap of the bouquet where no one would notice. Simone saw me do it when I rejoined the bridal suite. Her eyes widened. I gave the smallest nod. She exhaled and moved to stand beside me like a witness choosing her side of history. My father arrived to walk me down the aisle. That complicated me more than I expected. He looked nervous in his dark suit, older than he had any right to, trying so visibly to behave properly that I almost forgot how often he had failed me in less ceremonial rooms. But weddings do strange things to fathers. They hand them one polished ritual and call it significance, and some men cling to that because they do not know how else to show up. You okay? He asked. Yes. You don't look nervous. I'm not. He smiled, relieved by the wrong thing. The procession began. Music rose. The doors opened. And there it was. St. Mark's. Full. Candles lit. Flowers climbing the ends of the pews. Sun pouring through stained glass and jeweled columns. 100 faces turning. The exact wedding Celeste had wanted. Not garish. Not vulgar. Beautiful. In the way old money is beautiful when it wants to make compliance feel sacred. My father and I started down the aisle. Every step sounded louder than the one before it. The organ, the rustle of fabric, the soft intake of breath people always make when a bride appears. My bouquet smelled faintly of roses and eucalyptus. The satin runner gleamed under the church lights. Richard stood in the front pew already smiling like a shareholder at a favorable merger. Celeste's eyes shone with triumph. Daniel, at the altar. looked at me the way grooms are supposed to. Soft. Moved. Certain. And I loved him enough in that moment to hate what I had to do. That is the truth. No one says when they talk about strong women leaving. Sometimes strength is not the absence of love. It is love refusing to outrank self-respect. When I reached the front, my father kissed my cheek and stepped away. Father Brennan began the opening prayer. I heard almost none of it. My pulse was steady. My hands were steady. My voice, when the moment came, would be steady too. The first reading passed. The psalm, the gospel, the brief homily about covenant, patience, family, and faith. At one point, Father Brennan spoke about marriage as the joining of not only two people but two households. I nearly laughed at the precision of that wound. Then came the point just before the vows. Father Brennan looked down at his program. There will now be a family blessing, he said. Celeste folded her hands in the front pew with serene expectation. That was my cue. Before anyone else could move, I stepped forward and reached into the side fold of my bouquet. I pulled out the pages I had hidden there. At first, people thought I was reading private vows. That is why no one reacted immediately. I turned to Father Brennan and said, clearly enough for the microphone to catch, before we continue, I need to say something. A rustle moved through the church. Tiny. Then stillness. Daniel's expression shifted from affectionate focus to confusion. Nora? He said quietly. I turned toward the congregation. To this day, I can tell you exactly what I saw. My mother frozen in the second pew. Simone already straightening. As if bracing for impact she had chosen to survive. Richard frowning. Not yet worried. Just annoyed by deviation. Celeste very still. The way snakes go still. And everywhere else, faces leaning toward spectacle without yet knowing its name. I smiled once, softly, because in that moment I felt something rare and sacred. Not rage, freedom. I want to thank everyone for being here. I said, I know many of you came to witness a marriage. My voice echoed slightly through the sanctuary. I did too. Now the room was silent enough that I could hear fabric shifting. Daniel took half a step toward me. Nora. I lifted one hand. Not dramatic. Not shaking. Just enough. He stopped. For months. I continued. I believed this wedding was the start of a partnership. I believed the person standing beside me and I were building a life together. But over time, what was built around me was not a partnership. It was a production. A gasp somewhere in the middle pews. Very small. Very gratifying. Celeste stood. Nora, she said sharply. In that dangerous whisper, women like her mistake for authority. This is not the time. I looked at her. No, I said into the microphone. It is exactly the time. That was the first church-wide gasp. Not the big one. The warm-up, because everyone heard it. The direct contradiction. The bride refusing the mother of the groom in a church full of witnesses. I continued before anyone could regain control. I was never asked what kind of wedding I wanted before venues were selected. A church was booked without my agreement. My guest list was changed. My ceremony was edited. My dress was altered without my consent. Decisions were made for me again and again. Then explained to me, as if gratitude were the appropriate response. Daniel's face had gone white. Not because he did not recognize the facts, because he recognized them too late. Father Brennan looked deeply uncomfortable, but, to his credit, did not interrupt. Perhaps because even he understood that you cannot bless a covenant while one party is publicly naming coercion. Celeste took 2 steps into the aisle. "This is absurd," she said. I met her eyes. "What's absurd?" I replied. "Is planning a bride's entire wedding without asking her a single meaningful question and still expecting her to smile at the altar." There it was. The line, the one that traveled through the room and landed everywhere at once. That was the full gasp. Not theatrical screaming. Just a collective intake of breath so sharp it sounded like the whole church had been struck in one place. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." I heard a program slip from someone's lap. I heard, from somewhere behind my left shoulder, Simone say under her breath, "Yes." Daniel finally found his voice. "Nora, please," he said. "Can we talk about this privately?" Private. That word, always private, once public consequence appears. I turned toward him fully then. Because whatever came next had to be for him as much as for them. That was the problem. I said, "I did talk about it privately. Over and over. Every time your mother overstepped. You called it excitement. Every time I objected. You called it stress. You kept asking me to wait until after the next decision. The next deposit. The next compromise. As if the marriage would somehow start once I had accepted enough disrespect." He looked wrecked. Good. Not because I wanted to hurt him for sport. Because truth is often the first useful pain men like Daniel are forced to feel. "I loved you," I said. Pestinse? The whole church heard that too. "I loved you enough to keep hoping you'd choose us over comfort. But if I marry you today, I am not entering a partnership. I am entering a hierarchy. And I will not spend my life negotiating with your mother for basic authorship over my own existence." Celeste made a sharp sound of outrage. Richard rose now, too. Red-faced and furious in the contained way wealthy men get furious when social order collapses in public. "This is disgraceful," he snapped. I turned to him. "No," I said. "What's disgraceful is mistaking money, planning, and family reputation for permission." There was a murmur then. A shift in the room. This is the part people forget about public confrontations. They imagine everyone stays frozen. They do not. Rooms start choosing. Tiny alignments happen. Shock becomes assessment. Assessment becomes judgment. And once enough people grasp the pattern, power begins leaking out of the people who relied on silence. My mother started crying. Not embarrassed crying. Relief crying. I saw it clearly. Her shoulders shaking. One hand over her mouth. As if some trapped version of herself had just watched her daughter refuse the inheritance she had once accepted. Daniel reached for me. I stepped back. "Do you mean this?" he asked. There are questions that reveal character only because the answer should already be obvious. "Yes," I said. The church was so quiet then that my next words seemed to ring on the stone. I am not marrying into a family that treats my voice as an inconvenience. And I am not marrying a man who asks me to keep proving I deserve one. He dropped his hand. I watched the understanding arrive in him not as anger first, but as collapse. Collapse is slower, more human, His whole body seemed to fold inward by degrees, as if he were finally seeing the months behind us all at once and finding no place to stand that made him innocent. "Nora," he said again. "Softer now. I can fix this." And there it was, the line that would have won 6 months earlier. Too late. Some repairs do not fail because they are impossible. They fail because the damage was only recognized once the audience arrived. "You could have," I said. "You chose not to." Then I turned to Father Brennan. "I'm sorry for the scene," I told him, "but I would be more sorry to lie in front of God." He closed his program slowly, and, to his everlasting credit, nodded. That nod did more than any sermon could have. It told the room that decorum was no longer morally superior to truth. I set my bouquet on the nearest chair, removed my ring, and placed it on top of the folded ceremony program on the altar rail. That was the final gasp. Not because of the speech, because symbols matter. A woman in silk putting down the ring in a candlelit church full of witnesses. You cannot out-organize an image like that. Celeste moved toward me, face stripped now of all social varnish. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed. That almost made me laugh. Because ingratitude is the accusation controlling people use when obedience is withdrawn. I looked directly at her and said, loud enough for the first 4 pews to hear, "You wanted a beautiful wedding? You should have tried respecting the bride." Then I stepped off the altar. Simone was already moving. She met me halfway down the side aisle with my coat and bag. Because of course she had brought them. My mother stood too, shaken and crying. But she did not try to stop me. She only reached for my hand as I passed and squeezed once. That squeeze nearly broke me. Daniel did not follow immediately. Neither did Richard. Celeste called after me once, sharp and furious. But by then the room had shifted too far. Too many people had heard too much. Too many eyes were on her. Power hates witnesses. It especially hates witnesses who now understand the script. The church doors opened. Cold air hit my face. And just like that, I was outside in white silk under a bright afternoon sky. No longer a bride. Not yet anything else. Breathing harder than I had all day. Behind me, through the thick wood of the doors, I could hear the muffled thunder of a family finally collapsing under the weight of what it had mistaken for tradition. We got into Simone's car. She peeled away from the curb before I had even fully closed the door. For the first 30 seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she glanced over and said, "Well?" I started laughing, then crying, then both at once, which is what freedom sounds like when it arrives through wreckage. We drove without direction at first, out past neighborhoods and retail strips and new developments Daniel would probably have called promising corridors. I took off my veil in the passenger seat and threw it into the back. Simone found napkins in the console. I ruined all of them. My phone began exploding. Calls. Texts. Voicemails. Daniel. My father. Elise. Unknown numbers. 1 from Richard. 3 from Celeste. I turned the phone face down. "No," Simone said. "Airplane mode. Immediate." I did. Then we drove to a small hotel on the edge of Lake Norman, where Simone talked the front desk into giving us a room with a balcony and no questions. I changed out of my dress with shaking hands while she ordered fries, sparkling water, And bourbon. I did not drink the bourbon. I ate fries and a bridal slip at a little round table overlooking cold gray water and felt the shape of my life rearranging itself around a hole where certainty used to be. That first night was not empowering. Let me be honest about that. It was awful. I loved him. My body still expected I would see Daniel when I turned corners. My brain kept replaying his face when I said I loved you in the past tense. Every romantic mythology I had absorbed about perseverance and compromise came flooding up to accuse me of failure. But underneath all that grief was something cleaner. Relief. No more negotiating reality. No more waiting for him to notice what I had already explained. No more being told not to make things harder when harder meant visible. The official ending came 48 hours later, in Daniel's townhouse living room. Neutral ground. If there can be such a thing where engagement photos still sit framed on a console table, he looked terrible. Not theatrically terrible, truly terrible. Sleepless, unshaven, hollowed out in ways expensive, tailoring cannot hide. I'm sorry, he said before I sat down. That was new. Not, I'm sorry you're upset. Not, I'm sorry this happened. Just, I'm sorry. I believed him. And it still changed nothing. He said he had not understood how much he had been asking me to absorb. Said he knew his mother was overbearing, but had always thought he could manage both sides until things settled. Said he loved me. Said he would cut them off if that was what it took. Said we could leave Charlotte. Start over. Do a courthouse wedding. No family. No spectacle. Just us. If he had said those words 6 months earlier, maybe there would have been a future. But people reveal themselves not only by what they will do eventually, by when they finally do it. I don't want a version of you that only appears after public humiliation. I told him. He cried then. Quietly. One hand over his eyes. I had never seen him cry before. And because love does not turn off just because it should, part of me wanted to move toward him. I did not. I needed you when saying no to your mother was merely uncomfortable. I said, not now. When saying yes to me costs you your image. He whispered, that's not fair. I looked at him for a long moment. Neither was any of this. We ended it there. No screaming. No thrown objects. No cinematic cruelty. Just grief and accuracy sitting on opposite ends of a very expensive sofa. The practical aftermath was messier. Deposits lost. Vendor negotiations. Dress returns impossible. Gossip immediate. The wedding video team, to my eternal gratitude, refunded part of their fee after one editor privately emailed to say, for what it's worth, I think you did the brave thing. The church kept the deposit. Fair. They had delivered exactly what was booked. Elise sent a carefully neutral email about outstanding balances, and then, 2 weeks later, another one off record saying she wished she had listened more carefully when I first raised concerns. That mattered too. Not because it fixed anything, because every system involved in erasing a woman's voice is built out of small people making practical choices. My mother surprised me most. For the first time in my adult life, she got angry on my behalf without apologizing for the volume of it. She told relatives who said I had embarrassed the family that embarrassment was a cheap price for escaping the wrong marriage. She returned gifts, shut down gossip, even confronted my father when he suggested I might have waited until after the ceremony to avoid all the public damage. The damage? She told him. was done long before the church? I heard about that conversation later and sat in my kitchen crying over a bowl of cereal like a woman in a very unglamorous resilience commercial. Celeste, meanwhile, entered what I think of as her philanthropy phase of revenge. Not overt attacks. Curated character assassination. She framed the story as my instability, claimed I had become overwhelmed, suggested pressure from my side had made me act irrationally, told one family friend she had opened her heart to someone who ultimately didn't understand the dignity of commitment. Dignity of commitment. That line was so elegant, I almost admired it. Almost. But here's where the public altar moment saved me in ways I did not fully predict. Too many people had been there. Too many had watched her override me in planning meetings. Too many had seen the shape of that family for years, and simply lacked a focal incident around which to organize their private suspicions. Once the wedding collapsed publicly, stories began rising. Quiet ones, useful ones. An aunt who had been steamrolled over holiday hosting for 20 years. A cousin's wife, whose baby shower had been redesigned without permission. A former neighbor who said Celeste once sent back sympathy flowers because the arrangement photographed too common. Pattern is persuasive, especially when a woman finally names it in a room full of witnesses. As for me, I did what women do when an entire future detonates in formal wear. I rebuilt smaller. I took a month off work. Then I went back and threw myself into a museum expansion fundraiser, with the kind of focus heartbreak sometimes grants. I moved apartments, cut my hair shorter, sold 3 unopened wedding gifts, and bought myself a leather chair I still own. I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Levin, who had a gift for saying devastatingly useful things in calm tones. On our 3rd session, after I spent 40 minutes describing all the subtle moments in which I should have recognized the truth sooner, she said, "You are treating delayed recognition like moral failure." I stared at her. She went on, "You were not weak for hoping someone you loved would become adequate. You were simply late to the evidence." Late to the evidence. I wrote that down. It helped. A year later, I was promoted to Director of Development. 2 years later, I chaired a restoration campaign for a women's art center housed in a converted church downtown. That detail was not lost on me. Life occasionally has a sense of irony, sharp enough to feel like mercy. At the opening gala, I wore a dark green gown I chose without consulting a single living soul. No one revised the seating chart. No one altered the neckline. No one suggested my preferences needed balancing against family legacy. I stood under restored stained glass in a building once meant for vows and helped dedicate it to work. Women and public voice. I thought of St. Mark's then. Not with pain exactly. With clarity. I sometimes hear from Daniel, though rarely now. The first year he sent long emails I did not answer. Apologies. Explanations. News that he had moved out of Charlotte for a while. News that he was in therapy. News that his relationship with his parents had cracked under the pressure of what happened. I believed all of it. Still no. Some endings are not punishments. They are conclusions. 3 years after the wedding, that wasn't. He sent one final message. "You were right long before I was brave enough to admit it. I'm sorry it cost you a church full of witnesses for me to understand." That one I answered. I wrote, "I hope you build a life where understanding arrives earlier." Nothing more. No cruelty. No invitation. Just the truth. Polished down to its useful edge. And if you're wondering whether I ever regretted doing it at the altar, in front of everyone, in silk and flowers and candlelight and scandal, The answer is no. I regretted needing to. I regretted loving a man who could not separate devotion from compliance. I regretted every moment I made myself smaller to keep the peace. But the altar? No. Because here is what people do not understand when they say public confrontations are too much. Sometimes public is the only place left where private truth can survive. If I had raised those objections one more time behind closed doors, they would have been softened again, deferred again, managed again. The wedding would have gone forward. The marriage would have followed. And my silence would have been filed under maturity by everyone benefiting from it. Instead, I gave the truth a microphone. And yes, the entire church gasped. Good. It should have. A room should gasp when a woman finally refuses the role everyone assigned her. A church should gasp when a bride says no to a hierarchy pretending to be holy. People should gasp when beauty fails to conceal control. That gasp was not my shame. It was theirs. The years since have taught me something I wish more women learned before formal wear and deposits get involved. Control rarely arrives looking monstrous. It arrives useful, helpful, experienced, well-connected, tradition-minded, concerned about timing, concerned about family, concerned about what will look right. And by the time you realize your own life is being arranged around someone else's preferences, everyone expects gratitude because they mistake labor for love and money for moral authority. So if you are planning a wedding, or a move, or a baby shower, or anything that will expose the hidden structure of a family, pay attention to this. Who gets to decide? Who gets translated when they overstep? Who gets called emotional when they object? Who keeps being told to wait until after the next thing? That is the map. Follow it early. I did not get the marriage. I lost the man I loved. I watched a future collapse in public. And still, walking out of St. Mark's in a silk dress under cold daylight remains one of the most honest moments of my life. Because I did not leave a wedding, I left an arrangement. And those are not the same. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Revenge Story Vault. And if you have ever watched people call control care because it came dressed nicely, leave the word enough in the comments. Because sometimes what saves your future is not patience. Sometimes it is refusing to say I do to a life that has been planned for you in your own name.